welcome to the open house of history, and thank you for being here this evening. This is the second in now a series of lectures
Yay!
exploring how history continues to affect us through how it feels. We began with a talk on Harriet Haskell, Waldoboro's pioneering educator, and a woman who loved another woman. Why is that important? Because her feelings of partnership and her shrewd emotional performance of queerness were inseparable from what she built around her. An all-girls college grounded in discipline, care, and emotional awareness. More broadly, that lecture asked, how could one person's emotional life form the basis of an entire educational and social reform movement? And that lecture is available on YouTube. This lecture widens the frame beyond the sensibility of a single life. Here, we're going to turn toward the collective, toward the architecture of civic belonging itself. The architecture of civic belonging. Please feel free to take the folding chairs leaning by the wall. Our question tonight is, what holds a community together? Now, I'm not just talking about prefabricated interest-based communities like a church congregation or a political group or even a knitting circle where you get together because you share a belief or because you share an interest. Rather, I'm exploring what allows very different people to come together and keep going together across generations, shifting identities and shifting economies. What activities and practices, spaces, and feelings? While any of those may contain elements of religion, politics, and craft, how do they together generate something broader and more emergent? A town's spirit, that which animates a town's sense of itself and even sustains its civic and economic life. As you walk or drive through Waldoboro, you may notice people going about their business, but you won't see so much ongoing, vibrant activity. Some buildings are a little more alive than others. Many sit still and empty. Some are closed. Many are underused and decaying. Most are gone. Yes, it's a sign of post-industrialization, digital isolation, overall disinvestment, and a sign of the natural passing of so many people who once made this town buzz with activity. And so yes, it could be understood as a question of changing society and culture and economy in a general sense, but how does it feel? What are its emotional qualities? For many people, this state of the town can generate a feeling of not knowing where you are in life's bigger picture, or what that bigger picture is. And so a feeling of not knowing what to do next, or what you can do, or what power you might have. Maybe you think fondly and sadly of the town you once knew, or the country, or the world you once felt, full of interest and hope. As the things that once gave life texture and rhythm, purpose even, for you, have faded. What you used to be able to make or build and feel alone or with others, you can't quite access anymore. Not in the same way, at least. Overall, it's a feeling of being out of place, of helplessness, of disorientation. Now, I'm not trying to wallow in this state of forlorn. I'm trying to recognize it as a common one. And it's not just about Waldoboro, or this country, or this present world. You may find yourself in it when, okay, you know what to do to survive, but still things seem to be untethered around you. Here's what we need to think about. Some people respond to this state of affairs through anger, blame, scapegoating, hatred. That's the quickest and easy way out, and the most destructive. Other people respond by falling further into despair and numbing themselves through dopamine drips of scrolling and swiping, or drug substances that temporarily reverse the despair into absolute elation. Of course, some people simply have to keep going or risk being worse off. And still others, and here's our focus tonight, join a club, start a group, organize an event, host a dinner. They get involved. And what results from this response, more than all the others, are strong relationships that give a feeling of continuity, purpose, and hope. And it is my contention that as people connect in this open way, they are able to adapt and generate the spirit that keeps people going and together. Not by dominating others or relying on a law, decree, or set of beliefs, but by absorbing the world around them. This is the art of community, and the substance of the American experiment. A people kept together by a spirit, the so-called cords of affection. People say now that they feel something happening in Waldoboro again. Is it that spirit? Tonight, we'll try to find more language for it, the forms it takes, and consider how it's generated in the first place. So to begin, I will turn to buildings. Not because buildings set the stage completely, but because they offer a most visible material form for at least something of a community's civic, economic, and emotional life over time. We are privileged to have had an archaeologist, Harbour Mitchell, conduct ongoing research around this area over the last 5 years. You can actually see some of his findings in the side room over here. And what his research shows is how early European settlers in the 18th century adapted their built environment as their needs evolved. They didn't just show up and build their settlement as such, but as a result of changing circumstances, a family shelter became a garrison, and then the foundation for proto-industry, and then maybe a house again. Harbour Mitchell has found traces of these changes in the earth: ceramics, tools, garrison posts, all on the same site. These artifacts show not a single purpose, but a shifting one: to survive, to form a community, to fight and defend, to work. Surely they paused to play the fiddle and sing, and surely they generated some kind of ongoing spirit out of a very confusing state upon arrival. But they were mostly doing what it took to survive. This is adaptation, but here it is adaptation for survival. For these people, the first truly communal building, communal in the sense of at least forging shared relationships, continuity, and purpose, was the church. People just trying to survive might not have the luxury of envisioning the future. They might, like the early German settlers, rely on their churches to give them that open, hopeful view. But the church was also fraught. As Maine was part of Massachusetts, where Congregationalism was the state religion, tensions flared between the English Congregationalists and the German Lutherans here. The non-integration of these groups is important. Their early churches were as much their own kind of garrison as gathering place. Waldoboro's unique story isn't just, look what we built, a little bit bigger than someone else, soon surpassed by another town. The more revealing and compelling point is that Waldoboro offers a uniquely stark example of how ethnic and religious identity posed a persistent and defining challenge to building a cohesive town community, even in the context of otherwise predominantly white rural New England. Yet, one of those early churches still stands. The Third Lutheran Church, now located in the German cemetery. You can see a picture above me here. It surely embodies a spirit of survival and even continuity. Indeed, it continues to be photographed and treasured by locals and students studying art and architecture. But its spirit of survival and continuity hinged on a certain level of ideological control. The family box pews and tall pulpit reflect intimacy and solidarity, families, holding the minister. They also suggest how intertwined with that was hierarchy and inward-facing family values. This was an early material manifestation of a cultural and religious split that echoes through the town to this day. So yes, here were strong, purposeful, continuing relationships, but not so much open and absorbing the world. In 1833, Massachusetts ended state-sponsored religion. New civic spaces to conduct town business emerged, but these often served state authority more than community spirit, especially the Custom House, where we sit now. Built in 1855 at the height of Waldoboro's shipbuilding economy. Designed by Ammi B. Young, the first supervising architect of the U.S. Treasury, it followed federal design standards, and you can see to my right a copy of his plans for this building. This was part of the country's first development of locally repeatable designs, incorporating classical forms such as high arches, monumental doors, columns, cornices, to assert national power and continuity. Continuity not with the previous century's Royal English authority, but with the ancient governmental ideals of the Greeks and Romans. How connected the United States was to those traditions is another question. The point is that the connection was, in these designs, based heavily on architectural assertion. The more modern combination of materials here, cast iron and brick, additionally offered fireproof durability. This building communicated durability and national power. What this space wasn't was adaptive. Just try banging a nail into these beams. This building was developed for specific government purposes. In design, function, and intent, it was about order, control, hierarchy. The main political player in town, Isaac Reed, lived next door, where the Waldo Theatre now stands. He arranged to have the government buy part of his orchard for this building. Imagine a federal building on your lawn. Imagine the power you feel and wield around town. Indeed, the design dictated how people moved, interacted, and experienced power when they entered the building. You can see that in the plans as well. You walked in, you dealt with the clerk, there wasn't much wiggle room. You can also see it worn into the floors below us. Centuries of people standing in one place and holding their ground. Yes, there was an uplifting quality to the building, but in its operation were feelings of judgment and limited access. Now, contrast that with Clark's Hall, built around the same time down the street, a mixed-use vernacular structure, wooden nails, surely less durable, but deeply adaptive. It no longer stands, but that's a picture of it behind you above the couch. A bowling alley and cafe on the first floor, probably with other offices and or shops. Above, on the second floor, a performance hall, the Star Theatre. That's right, Waldoboro had a theater before the Waldo. The Star Theatre was a place for lectures, dances, plays, and eventually movies. And I felt it important to include the interior shot of the bowling alley there from Clark's Hall, because the Sammy's bowling alley is the last remaining entertainment center in town today. Clark's Hall, though, wasn't unique. Sproul block, well, the previous, original Sproul block on the corner here, erected around the same time as Clark's Hall, also had an upper floor lecture hall. It was a very, very mixed-use building with shops and apartments as well. Check out the 4 pictures hanging there left of the window. And you can take a closer look when we're done. These mixed-use spaces were part of a much larger regional tradition of adaptation architecture. At this point, not just to survive, like in those early days, but more and more in response to changing economic, social, and cultural opportunities. In the busy and crowded 19th century of Waldoboro's shipbuilding era, people came and went. There was an increase in more varied encounter with the trades and ideas and arts of the world. There was a constant hustle and bustle. Community architecture absorbed and evolved with that movement. You all know the connected New England farmhouse, big house, little house, back house, barn. You see it all over as you drive around here. That too evolved to meet and further shape the diverse economic and expressive needs and outlets, trying to compete with the domineering economies of shipbuilding and lumber and other large-scale extractive industries. The connected farmhouse was a home open to work and various and new crafts, expansion, and invention. Its flow and integration of buildings cultivated feelings of dignity and also, I would argue, play. I mean, the barn was itself a kind of open hall. The adaptations of these structures were expressive of the emotional feel of the time and helped open it up. The point is that these spaces, especially the mixed-use buildings in town, weren't built to impose order, like a church or a government building, but to reflect community life. They embodied the amorphous shape of the social and cultural infrastructure itself. Not simply through mixed-use space with hall above, but in Sproul block, as you will see in the pictures, and I position those pictures so you can kind of glance back at the current Sproul block as well. You will see all sorts of differently sized and shaped, some huge, modern-looking upper floor windows, and the strangest, most entrancing, single temple-like column at the entrance. Next to a separate, super large door. A slapdash, almost whimsical combination of everyday business and uplift. Mixed feelings in the most capacious sense. There was something liberal about it all, part of the national reformist spirit that informed the connected farmhouse too. Indeed, Joseph Clark of Clark's Hall, shipbuilding financier and a political opponent of arch-conservative Isaac Reed, who lived next door, Joseph Clark was an early anti-slavery Republican, the reform cause of the time. He built the Star Theatre for his 4 daughters so that they would have a place to act and perform. And those here from my first lecture remember how important performance was for Harriet Haskell, who grew up across the street. There, around the picture of Clark Theatre, are 2 pictures of the young, dramatic women of Waldoboro. Not the Clark sisters, but certainly in line with them. Between the rigidity of the custom house and the looseness of Clark's Hall lies a mediating force that helps us understand how all this was connected. Mutual aid societies, such as the Masons, first chartered in Waldoboro in 1849. Just a few years before both those buildings went up. Now, the Masons emerged from a global history of egalitarian relationships within hierarchical cultures. After dispensing with a king, early America needed ways to institutionalize social bonds outside of war. Soldiers experienced bonding and also purpose, and so became the country's first, albeit forced, union. But then after the Revolutionary War, for example, the Society of the Cincinnati was formed, a mutual aid society for the elite, co-founded by Waldoboro's neighboring proprietor, Henry Knox. From then on, though, mutual aid societies in a liberalizing America, such as the Masons, who aided more than just their own members, and also the Oddfellows, chartered in Waldoboro in 1845, grew. The most popular, open, and co-ed of these types of organizations, the Granges. The National Grange of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry. The word Grange from grain, denoting barn and farm. Formed after the Civil War to promote local agriculture. Now, the Civil War had created a more centralized state and a more consolidated industrial organization of agriculture. But it also gave many small rural farmers the feeling of wartime camaraderie, exposure to cultural and ethnic difference and to different places in the country, as well as a sense of purpose, especially around the idea and feeling of a more expansive and open union. These were all defining qualities of a robust local social and cultural infrastructure and came to inform the Granges. Granges flourished in rural areas, obviously. Nationally, around this time, there was 1 per 5,400 people. In Maine, 1 per 1,800 people. Indeed, the first supposed purpose-built Grange is in nearby St. George. In Waldoboro, there were 4 Granges over time: the Waldoboro, Maple, Progressive, and Minanga Granges. At least 3 existing at the same time, serving a population under 2,500. That's basically 1 per 800 people. That's remarkably high. And on the back table there are 3 binders: applications for the Maple Grange, minutes for a meeting at the Progressive Grange, and a scrapbook of the Minanga Grange. Their buildings, the Grange buildings, and also the Oddfellows Hall, followed the familiar pattern of Clark's Hall and Sproul Block: commerce below, expression above, business and uplift. Upper floors could give that feeling. The collector of customs' refined authority was on display in this room in which we sit. And yes, large second-floor halls were easier to heat and quieter than street level, and they also reinforced the secrecy of some societies who supported their rituals by renting out space below them. But my point is that the real social and cultural power was in the open hall's connection with the everyday, the uplift of the everyday. These were building forms adapted to the commerce of conversation, the commerce of expression. And whether it was in rituals, performances, dances, lyceum talks, debates put on by locals or visiting speakers, these upper floor halls gave free form to the community's moral and civic life, shaping the community. In these halls and surrounding spaces, people knew each other's names, and they also knew each other's stories, politics, quirks, not always agreeing, but always with a means to engage. Here, in these halls, was face-to-face democracy. As Waldoboro resident Bill Blodgett, member of the Lions Club, chartered in town here in 1930, said to me recently at a Historical Society meeting, people once knew everyone in this town, not just by name, but by circumstances. Things have changed, he said, but it was still a good place, he made sure to say. I hope you're beginning to get the idea that the kinds of spaces and activities where all that spirit was rooted and how it came to be is this larger history within the 19th century. What I add now is that people didn't just know each other then. They knew each other through highly performative activities and events. This was community as theater, not in a belittling sense, but as a shared awareness. We each play a part, and that part matters. Because, in the grandest scheme, we're all in this together. The second floor hall, then, was a sacred space, not of religion or of state, but of democratic life. A place to think and assemble primarily through art and performance. How the roles people played were brought together is what built the spirit of the town. Even as the economy declined and population dropped here in Waldoboro, the performative spirit endured. As the poster above the couch shows, the Star Theatre hosted the latest films and even original plays on national themes, including one featuring local Maud Clark Gay, who served in the state legislature in the late 1920s. A mixed-use space and a mix of arts, and a mix of the local, the state, and the national too. The political stage became the theatrical stage. Even the more ritualistic and secretive mutual aid societies melded art and local expression into broader symbolic meaning. Take the Oddfellows harp there, used in meetings here in Waldoboro. What did people feel when its chords struck the air? Certainly in the hum of the sound was that meld of creativity and meaning, politics and business, suspended together in a heightened sense of harmony and reflection. The Masons devised many theatrical rituals for initiation, such as having new members wear red-colored glasses, red connoting struggle and sacrifice, as well as faith and charity, before being let into the light of membership. We have a pair of the red glasses on display there as well. More generally, and pertinent to the built environment, the Masons made ritual from architecture, adapting temple forms and classical features to inculcate personal and civic virtue through structure and repetition, resonant with the values of showing up, keeping tabs, performing duty. This kind of heightened sense of fellowship and camaraderie was of course felt in the many costumes of these groups, such as the Oddfellows neckpiece displayed there as well. But in the heyday of these gatherings and ceremonies here and across the country came the Great Depression. Yet, in Waldoboro, in the midst of that, art appeared in a stunning arrival and with a primarily technological gaze. It was 1936, and a wealthy resident spent well over $1 million in today's money for the construction of the Waldo Theatre. 95% of the workmanship and materials coming from Maine. Every person who worked on the building from the town was listed at the beginning of the opening day program, copies of which are sitting on the mantel there. The program also featured excerpts from Maine-raised poet Edwin Arlington Robinson's poem, The House on the Hill. I was struck by its inclusion. The poem is an elegy to an abandoned house. No one remembers who lived in it or anything about the people, yet the speaker is drawn to its windows, haunted by memory. The poem, of course, marks the final erasure of Isaac Reed's mansion, demolished to make way for the new theater. It had last been an antique dealership, a treasure house, its contents all sold off just a few years prior. How much better, the program states, of the Reed mansion, to have been removed before inevitable decay. Certainly the house wasn't going to be rebuilt or rehabbed to create a performance space, so best just get rid of it, right? But it's not so simple. There's an emotional element to the situation. The program asserts that, quote, such a house must have known the pain of outliving its time, end quote. And yet, the speaker of the poem, staring into the house, also feels a certain kind of pain. A distance that takes the form of a gaze from the outside. A desire for community engagement, and then its retreat. Something of these crossing of values is evidenced in the architecture of the Waldo Theatre itself. It was designed by Benjamin Schlanger, who would soon become one of the foremost cinema architects in the United States. It featured raked seating aimed upward at the screen, cutting-edge projection and sound systems, and a modernist space designed for full sensory immersion. Schlanger's goal was to eliminate distraction, what he called neutralization, which translated into minimal decoration and few exterior references inside the building. The only nods to the outside world, elegant and evocative in their singularity, were a model sailing ship and a mural of Maine's past and present. And you can see all these features and qualities in the images to my left. Cinema, at the time, was becoming the epitome of the arts, the new national stage. And this building imposed that vision with a new kind of order. Attention was paid to creating a smooth transition from street to theater, from the lobby into the lounge, and finally to the rear of the auditorium, at which point the outside world would have fallen away unnoticed. While the absence of a traditional ticket booth, replaced by an elegant desk, added a sense of intimacy, the whole impression was one of urbanity and cool decorum. Part of my point is that, like this building, the Custom House, the Waldo Theatre was also a purpose-built, single-use building shaped by external ideals. The screen dominated. Behavior was watched over. Though the space was publicly oriented, the experience was ultimately supposed to be deeply private and immersive. At the same time, another force was reshaping Waldoboro. The Route 1 bypass. Built at the same time, it channeled traffic around the village instead of through it. Visitors might stop at Moody's for pie, but they were heading elsewhere, northeast toward Acadia. Tourism boomed, summer camps flourished. Other towns adapted in one way, building less for residents and more for visitors. Experience was streamlined and flattened. In fact, in the mural of Maine past and present in the Waldo, pictured in the postcard on the wall above the mantel, a speeding bullet-like train holds the middle ground, moving in the opposite direction of the sailing boat on the water behind it. What would happen here in Waldoboro? The Star Theatre still held performances. Tony and Juanita, a popular Maine-based country music duo, came through town. You can check out their photograph and Star Theatre poster at the Waldoboro Historical Society. And while the microphone there once amplified voices in the diminishing Grange Halls, the Waldo hung that sign. Reasonable silence is appreciated. Excuse me. Screens were replacing bodies, voices coming from elsewhere. But still, community spirit flickered on. By 1941, the Waldo had added an L to the side of the theater to house the cafe, the Houndstooth Kitchen for moviegoers, an idea originally envisioned by the family who funded the theater's construction. Its interior was designed to resemble some additional rooms in their own Waldoboro home. Though food was prepared mostly off-site, they did hang a sign there over the fireplace. Although the cafe was never fully operational to the extent they desired. Then came TV, and by the late 1950s, the Waldo Theatre was abandoned. And the building became, fittingly, a Masonic hall. Yet, even their spirit couldn't adapt it further to the town. In April 1970, the Waldo as Masonic Hall was completely destroyed. Glass broken, chairs overturned, regalia strewn. Other businesses around were also vandalized and made the front page of the paper. A space of confusion had been ongoing and opening for a while here too. A local editorial read, quote, "Waldoboro's troubles with the lawless element have been long and burdensome. While other towns have experienced vandalism, never has a whole village been ravaged in a single night." A resident said, quote, "The hoodlums are not going to run this town anymore." End quote. Some wanted to form a vigilante committee, hunt the vandals down with weapons. As we all know, that's certainly one way to respond to the state of confusion. But interestingly, the vandals, they didn't steal anything. They weren't looking for loot, but for a means to express themselves out of despair, for control, certainly for some kind of purpose, to spark meaning in a world that had left them without one. Now, there's nothing preordained about their response. It could all have gone differently at any moment, as it could have in more recent similar cases. Indeed, this entire talk is about the constructive responses to the same feeling of general hopelessness and lack of direction people, young people, and their potential role models continue to encounter in the world. Interestingly, at that earlier lawless moment in Waldoboro's history, something else was formed, the Waldoboro Historical Society. A desire to save what was being lost. And objects have never stopped arriving in its doors. Because when meaning phrase, people hold on to things, to objects, to spaces, to memories. It's a way to hold on to one's sense of self, to community. In fact, many of the objects you see around you are on loan from the Historical Society. At some level, things are never whole, and beautifully so. Buildings decay, bodies wear down, but people rebuild, they adapt, they repurpose. Today, the Grange building in town is now, you guessed it, the Masonic Hall. The Oddfellows Hall is now a co-working space on the Tussle Annex. Dance Mania uses the upstairs of another former Grange Hall in the room that once hosted weekly community dances. Look at the poster hanging there in the corner, advertising music provided by Bill Freeman's band. And under the poster is a picture there of the band conducted by Bill, who was also the fire chief, interim police chief, and operator with his wife of the news store 2 doors down the street. Eventually, the Waldo Theatre became community run. Local actors, local voices. Note the cast pictures on the wall behind you. One of the musical Mame and also the unsinkable Molly Brown, which I chose because they're about creative, liberal, life of the party socialites, and they reminded me of the women of the Waldoboro Dramatic Club. In the process of the Waldo's adaptations, the rooms in the Houndstooth kitchen had even become a doctor's office. When the theater could not sustain itself financially and the building began falling apart, residents came together again, rehabbed it, rebuilt it, bit by bit. The people who did it are certainly as important as the people who built it. The more recent work, more artfully adaptive. Now, the Waldo Theatre leans into commercial programming to keep the doors open and in order to continue its community-centered work. Films followed by talks, performances with conversation, food with art. That's how the theater survives as community. And that's the heart of it. Art is not a luxury. And it's not something meant solely for consumption. It's not even the end goal. Art, in its broadest sense, art in talk, art in deliberation, in recitation, in composition, is the means by which people generate their own sense of purpose. It's what helps manage stress, lift people out of isolation, and bring in the outside world. Whether in the form of song or dance, lecture or craft, deliberation or play, art, in this sense, provides space to see the daily business of your life from a new perspective, in a new light, with new thoughts and new feelings. It's crucial to state, as I've shown, that this happens outside the family structure. It happens through community that is bigger and looser than any prefab group, where there is space for others to stand beside you and act with you, even if they play a different role or believe something else, as what is shared between you is the spirit of animation. Which brings us to this building now, the Open House of History. We're not just displaying artifacts, we're creating space for community to play out. After serving as a custom house and a post office, this building became the town library, widening the bounds of exchange and of who could enter your thoughts and feelings. This room we're sitting in was named after the Meninga Grange. The plaque is on the rear table as well. And as we envision it, the Open House of History continues to be a space for slowing down, for reflection, learning, and also reactivation. A building that we intend to activate, through which we intend to activate the stage of the town in a way that asks us to listen and respond. So in closing, what does it mean to be a good or bad actor on the stage of the town in the art of community? Certainly it means not being dogmatic and demanding, but rather rooted and responsive, able to absorb difference while remaining yourself. It means making space for joking, teasing even, playful treatments of one another as fellow characters that once opened space for feeling, but today are more quickly felt as politically incorrect or an automatic negation of self. You can't engineer the behavior and feelings of others through demand or design. And as we've seen in the art of community, buildings too are expressive forms, not dictators of behavior. Buildings are part of the play and the set. We can imagine how the interior columns on the first floor of this building, like the temple columns of Masonic halls, the pilasters and other classical touches of connected farmhouses, the colonial columns of the Waldo's exterior signal a house also open to its surroundings. To enter that emotional space, what I call the feelscape of time, is to confront the divisions that have haunted this larger place and any place. What we most need as a community are spaces for loneliness, for vulnerability to appear. And before jumping in to fill the void with entertainment, to let the desire for meaning and value accrue, out of which then arises the resilience, the creative persistence, the adaptation that is manifested here, and the look and feel of so many of the buildings I've talked about tonight. As we've seen, these emotionally open connections are not always names, they're not even visible, but they shape how we move through the town, how we interact, how we stay. On the ground floor is a community map that doesn't highlight the public record of property lines and tax assessments. It's a growing collection of where people live and where they like to visit and gather, where they love, where they dream, where they remember, and where they feel many other complicated emotions. You're invited to add to it, not to impose any official order, but to better reflect what actually binds us. These walls may crumble, but the spark of community returns whenever someone feels space to explore their ideas and follow their feelings. And the emotional through line is adaptation. And I see it, even though I've lived here for a very short time, I see that emotional through line of adaptation baked into the life and people of Maine. It seems to me that people come to Maine with purpose and to find purpose. Not to be handed one, not to be told what it is, but to make it. Or they're born into that ethos. That's what makes someone from here. Not birthplace or lineage, but purpose. We are a community of independent outsiders, putting ourselves out there, and against the odds, coming out resilient. It's bold, resourceful, and deeply American, and it demands integrity and focus. But it's a way of being, the only way of being, that inspires the infrastructure of an entire community through good, local, everyday artistry and performance. Thank you. Questions, have a little discussion, hear what anyone has to say. I would also remind you that at 7:30 is a concert at the Waldo Theatre featuring Conrad Winslow, who lives in Waldoboro, and friends. And if you already have a ticket, you can bring along someone else for free. And if you buy a ticket, you get a second one for free. So I encourage you all to attend at 7:30. But questions, comments, anything you want to share or feel out loud? Yes.
Yeah. I'm looking at the old German church, and I've been to funerals and weddings, not there, but in churches designed with those squares.
Yeah.
And the experience of being in them it's not a question, I just want to hear your response. But the experience of being in them is that you're facing each other, your knees are all touching each other, you're squished in, you have to look at each other. It's so different from the other kind of church where the pews are all facing in one direction to the altar.
Yeah, I mean, I could give, Les could give a whole lecture on, I'm sure, the architecture of the church. I'm not asking for it, but
Good.
I wanted to simply say that it's emotionally complicated. You know, I mean, it's easy to interpret that as, wow, what a strict hierarchical order, and that is present. But so is the quality of being held very intimately by your family, and knowing that you can rely on those people when all else fails. And that can be the most sustaining feeling in the world. So it's really important to give space to that. And also say that it brings with it other qualities and ways of seeing the world that might not facilitate that for everyone. And two, also to put that into some kind of context, some kind of historical context of why and when that way of understanding and being organizing oneself comes about. Yes?
If there was a Reed mansion where the Waldo is, does that mean, so there were two Reed mansions?
There were two Reed mansions. Yeah.
Same family?
Yep. Father and son.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Colonel, honorable. Much more politically invested and involved in Waldoboro's politics over time than the father. Of course, that has to do with just when the family moved here. So when the Reed family moved here, the father had been living elsewhere. I'm pretty sure the son was born here. I'm not quite positive, but he would have grown up in this world and basically ruled the 19th century Waldoboro political scene before the Civil War. In fact, speaking of families, there was even a split in the family. All of the family did not share the same conservative politics. I believe one of the brothers, kind of black sheep of the family, was much more liberal. And Isaac, the brother, wrote at some point about his brother's politics, and that his brother was a member of the anti-custom house party. Yes.
I'm just curious if you want to answer this, what drew you to this town?
Well, Conrad and I wanted to live by the ocean with trees and space, but I particularly wanted to be involved in a community. And so I was looking for a community of a certain scale that wasn't too large, so that if you got involved, you could make a difference, and everybody would know your name. Which is why I was really interested in Bill Blodgett saying that's how it was, and then me thinking, okay, so what makes a community that way, beyond simply it has the right number of people to be recognized? There's a certain kind of spirit that has to animate and bring people together, aware of each other. And so I was interested in that scale, and we happened to find, property located in the town of Waldoboro. So I knew nothing about this town beforehand. And I have to say, dedicating now all of my time and energy to this project, Waldoboro's history and ongoing life, is, I guess, just a testament to like my deep commitment to the community side. That it's not really, it's just gonna sound like egotistical, but it's not about me. That's what I'm saying, because I spent my career and so much of my life writing about everything but this. But I arrived at a moment in my life where I needed to bring those ideas together, but also apply them to the world and let them unfold in a way that actually impact people's lives and creates a conversation that affects more people than just me or a few scholars. Yes, Jean.
As a follow-up, I think it is all about you. It is about everybody in this room
And what you're talking about is a call to action to step up and create the community we want. So I'm gonna push back on you a little bit with great love, of course.
Well, and I think that, I mean, I'm also curious about like, yeah, what makes a leader of a community? What is that? It's not simply a position. I think it's actually more of a style, more a certain kind of presentation, an ability to like speak across differences, but remain yourself. And that's something that I'm really interested in like experimenting with, you know, because I feel like that's the world in which I want to live.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yes.
200 years ago, when Waldoboro, what is now Waldoboro, was multiple communities, South Waldoboro, how were they separate? I mean, wasn't a 3-minute car drive? It was a half-day
Yeah.
pony ride. So were they really much more insular?
Yeah, it was much more insular because of transportation, of course, but also because those neighborhoods developed along ethnic and religious differences, right? So when the English moved in, they're the ones who essentially spearheaded, I would think, the incorporation of the town, because that was a structure that was an extension of the Massachusetts Bay Colony at the time. Germans didn't want anything to do with that. They didn't care about the American experiment in this kind of, let's figure out a way to create, equal government, no. So, nonetheless, they were living in a country where that was becoming the predominant mode of order, and so they were expected to pay taxes, and that caused a lot of problems, especially because they didn't want to fund, say, education of other children in town, because their kids would be forced to learn English, and they wanted them to keep speaking German and many other cultural traditions. Of course, then the economic differences differentiated different areas in terms of where the shipbuilding was located, closer to the village now. And I mean, there's so many ways to think about those differences. I mean, a lot of the first Germans who arrived had lots on Dutch Neck, and because that was part of a different patent, they were kicked off or forced to pay an additional amount beyond what they paid Waldo, although it wasn't very much. And some of them paid and stayed, and others moved, but by that point, the only lots that were left were in South Waldoboro, so they ended up basically on the border of friendship. But that means that that South Waldoboro neighborhood became not just German, but became a resistance movement against hierarchy and power, first against proprietors, and then also against the English elite who took over the town. And the English elite, such as Isaac Reed, they actively restricted the vote of the Germans. So they, for example, held town meetings during like mud season, when it was impossible for the people in South Waldoboro to get to town to vote. So that was one of the ways that he controlled the vote. So much so that on the eve of the Civil War, Waldoboro as a town voted overwhelmingly for pro-slavery Democratic candidates, when everywhere else in Maine voted overwhelmingly for Republican anti-slavery candidates. Waldoboro was the opposite. And that was because of how the vote and the politics were run by the Reed machine next door.
Gerrymandering through muddy roads.
Is there still something of a village-rural divide?
I'm sorry?
Is there still something of a village versus rural divide that,
Yeah,
and
there is.
priorities and?
There is. I think that emotionally, this is my point, it's still present, even though it's not drawn along ethnic or religious lines, right? So my whole project is basically how nonetheless can a town or any area still operate in through particular emotional relationships and dynamics that were established 250 years ago, even though politics have changed, issues have changed, all sorts of things have changed. Yet nonetheless, these emotional dynamics remain, right? And so this is a really important historical question in general.
Talking about not wanting to fund education, it was like, oh, so nothing.
Yeah. Well, in fact, if you read Jasper Stahl's two-volume history of Waldoboro, he goes on and on and on about how divisive funding education was And he talks about how in the beginning it was because the families didn't want to pay for, being educating their kids in another tradition. But then it was just, I think, not simply like a reasoned argument. It was just like, screw that. Like I'm just angry, and I'm going to use my resentment to stall the development of education for this entire town. And that feeling is still present. So people are inhabiting the dynamic without actually knowing where it came from. I mean, that's like fascinating.
It's like history.
Yes,
It's like everything.
exactly. But to foreground the emotional dynamics, I think is, for me, the way into understanding it, giving language to it, and then maybe finding a way to open up those feelings to something else. Les?
I've always wondered why Waldoboro managed to stay together. Every single other town in Lincoln County split into different towns. Waldoboro is not only the largest population, but by far the largest per square mile.
Yeah.
Because somehow you guys hung together. How and why?
Right. I think that has a lot to do with Waldoboro becoming this building, the head of the customs district of this area of Maine. So I do think there was pressure for consolidation driven by industry, by the development of industry. I would say probably that's the main reason, but I would also say it has to do with the wheeling and dealing of the local politicians and how connected they were with state and national politics. I mean, on the eve of the Civil War, Jefferson Davis was entertained in Reed Mansion next door. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. So they were connected, I think, and I think that feeling of cohesion really mattered. Cohesion at the top, from the top down. The people at the bottom, they didn't have any political power. Ron?
Michael, the risk you're taking is you're very good at history and can analyze things very well. So thank you for what you're doing. I was wondering, Waldoboro was an economic hub, both agriculturally and shipbuilding, and that was a big part of why it has, even to this day, potentially represents, a lot of things. But before that, there were indigenous populations, the Wabanaki. It also had a history with the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
Could you plan a lecture in the future?
Well, you have to come on my walking tour of the future Potomac River Community Park, where it's probably like a third of what I say is about Wabanaki history and the relationship between them and the early settlers, but also emotionally what it meant to encounter people different from you and why there wasn't the integration that we would hope for today. And also on that tour, I weave in the Cole family, who Isaac Cole was a Revolutionary War soldier, and he built the house just off the blue house on top of the hill across from Hoff's house. And that was, according to Jasper Stahl, the stop on the Underground Railroad. So in the tour, I talk about how on the surface, there's a kind of emotional conservatism, but there are all these cross currents happening in Waldoboro over time, and how we understand those currents, why was it the Cole family, and other information about the people coming through the Underground Railroad who were probably headed to Warren, where there was an established black community at the time, and the road to Warren basically went right past the Cole house. Anyways, so I'm interested in how thinking about history as an emotional space is what actually allows for these differences to happen and be cultivated.
When is the lecture?
Well, that's the talk that walk time.
I mean,
Oh my God. And then, you want to come on the water? Yeah, you've already been there.
Oh, it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same one, yeah. But
Tell everybody else when.
yeah, I know. Well, so I've been doing that, and that's evolving. But we just for the first time did a tour by water of Waldoboro history, interweaving feeling, and through economy and ecology. And many people in this room were on it and helped plan it. So I'm trying to like bring all these things together under the auspices of this project to help people sort of make more sense of what we can accomplish.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
You're probably preaching to the choir here. Has anybody in the town or the school system invited you to talk and share your ideas?
I have been slowly speaking with teachers in the school system. As we know, the school system, as most school systems are like very insular. They're very hard to get into because of all sorts of, well, lack of funding and the more immediate needs. But I am in conversations with teachers, and I'm, you know, as you know, or other people know, heavily involved in town committees, you know, talking with people who, yes, are not in this room here, but know about and are interested in what I'm doing, and finding other ways to basically meet them where they are.